The Lord of the Rings of Power, Episode 1 and 2, Ending Explained. Well, it's finally here. After a long-awaited time frame and an amalgamation of theories and excitement, the first two episodes landed on Prime for the new Lord of the Rings series. With the first two episodes being described as slow, I thought it would be worth delving into it, recapping, breaking down, and explaining the ending, whilst also seeing if the slowness of the first two episodes will be worth the reward at the end. And also if the title of the most expensive TV show ever, coming in at $485 million, is also something that contributes to a better viewing experience and enhanced storytelling. So let's get into it. Here is The Lord of the Rings of Power Episode 1 and 2, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. With it being the first two episodes of a show that has a mammoth of a world inside of it, I thought I'd break this video down by episode 1 and episode 2, whilst also discussing the main characters that we were introduced to. Episode 1. In the first episode of the show, I thought the story was handled really well. We got to understand the motives and intentions of the main characters, mostly Galadriel, and the understanding of the elves that fought Sauron and the orcs centuries ago. But we saw it tie into everything that we saw unfold throughout the entirety of Middle-earth in the present day. We saw the relationship Galadriel had with her brother in the past, the guidance that he gave her when she was being mocked by others, and the inspiring nature that he had on her. This is something that ran through to her in the present day, where we saw that she was now committing her life to hunting Sauron and swearing to defeat him whilst also avenging her brother's death. We saw that at the time that we entered the world, it was giving off the impression that peace is still something that was present. Even though that we saw that Galadriel had found a marking that Sauron had left and went far north in the hunt to find it, whilst also the High King Gil-galad was somewhat understanding that there was still a darkness and evil that was out there, but not wanting to bestow fear onto the elves in Lindon. We saw the High King send the Northern Army, who were alongside Galadriel, to the undying lands of Valinor, for proving that there was no war. Valinor is a place where elves go once they serve their purpose and is almost seen as a death. The alternative would be to stay in Middle-earth, but they would just fade into obscurity. To avoid the closest thing to death for an elf, we saw Galadriel jump off the ship into the Sundering Seas. We saw this mirror the start of episode 1, with the ship being sunk. And this wasn't a fate for her. She had a purpose still, and that was to hunt Sauron. The others gave up long ago, so it made sense as to why they were willing to go. Outside of what we were witnessing in Lindor, we entered Rhovanion, where we met the Harfoots. This was where what was going on in Galidion's arc was starting to merge into what was happening where the Harfoots were currently residing. They encountered some strange occurrences when compared to previous times in the year. There were big folk moving through the land, which was something that didn't usually happen, and there were also stars in the sky at the time of year where there wasn't usually. This was a small but subtle nod to the fact that there's a wider issue at play, and whilst it might not be dangerous at the moment, strange things are occurring. This was where we met Nori Brandyfoot, who was rather different to many of the other Harfoots that were there. She was intrigued by a lot of things and was adventurous. Rather than wanting to stay put and migrate like all of the others, she walked close to the line of danger, and we saw this when she was taking berries from the field and a wolf was present. She was calm and composed, and I think it said a lot about her personality and how she would come to deal with the events that got thrown her way later on in the episode. As the episode went on with the Harfoots, we saw something come flying through the sky like it was an asteroid of some kind, and it landed in Rhovanion when Nori and Poppy found it. It was a man who is referred to as the Stranger, but we know is most likely Oren. He was on the ground surrounded by flames that had surrounded all of him as he laid bare on the ground. This was all we got from him in the episode. In Lindor, as this was happening, we saw a leaf from the tree that represented the strength and vitality of the people of Lindor turning to black as a darkness took over, just like the darkness that we saw coming out of the cow in the Southlands. Within the Southlands, which is referred to as the Land of Men, they seem to be one of the more vulnerable kinds due to the fact that they had elves watching over them for the past 79 years. We had Arondir who had grown quite fond of the place, despite the fact that due to the High King calling out the fact that there was nothing out there that could cause a threat, he wanted the elves to return. However, Arondir had other intentions. We heard that he'd been with a human woman called Bronwyn, who was a healer in the town. But Arondir's partner informed him of the fact that there'd only ever been 2 occasions where an elf and a human had tried to live together, and they both resulted in tragedy. so it was something that should be avoided. The darkness was found present within the cow, and as well as that, Theo found a weapon that was underneath the floorboards in a barn that had Sauron's sigil engraved within it. He took it and kept it for himself, and it showed that bad things were going to follow, as we saw in episode 2. The first episode established the world well and introduced us to all of the characters without it being overbearing and confusing, as there are a lot of species, lands, and creatures in the universe. It was slow, but I think it definitely needed to be in order to allow us to understand the past, the motives behind the characters, and what's happening centuries after conflict. Episode 2. As episode 2 kicked off, we picked up directly after the end of episode 1, where we saw Galadriel in the sea, stranded in darkness and looking like she was now all alone. But the understanding of why she did what she did. Galadriel has meaning far beyond what the elves bestow upon her and the title of Commander of the Northern Army. She wants to be like her brother and prove that there is an evil still present within the world. Shortly afterwards, we cut back to the Harfoots, where we saw them dealing with the individual that fell from the sky. And as Nori touched him, it caused a reaction. The flames started igniting, rocks started rising, and we also saw them staring into each other's eyes as it looked like something passed through. Once this happened, we saw Nori and Poppy take Oren to a place of hiding so that they could keep him quiet without causing fear or panic amongst the Harfoots. As the episode went on, we saw Nori trying to understand everything that she could about this man to the point where she was communicating with him, giving him food and trying to learn why he was there and where his home was. However, she didn't get anywhere with it. All we heard him chant was mana, which was something that was unfamiliar. One thing we did see during this was the powers that he bestows. He's able to manipulate the surroundings around him to his advantage, and when he emits anger, it's like a gust of wind surrounds him, drawing energy around him to the point where everything moves in the direction he's facing. The time that we learned something about him was in the closing moments of the episode, where we saw him use the fireflies that were inside of Poppy's lantern to inform them that he was looking for a certain constellation of stars. So it seems as though he's looking to return to where he came from. In the original Lord of the Rings book, there's no character called Oren, so there isn't much known of him as of yet. But it seems as though he's an evil character due to the death that surrounds him when he utilized the fireflies, so I think there's definitely more to learn about him in the coming episodes. Outside of all that was going on with the Harfoots, we saw Elrond go to Lord Celebrimbor in Eregion, as he wanted the assistance in understanding how he could build a tower that contained a forge that was the most powerful in Middle-earth. It would transform Middle-earth if he were to have the tower, but he needed it built quickly. We didn't find out why he needed it built so quickly, but I'm imagining it could be to do with the impending darkness that's coming. And just like the other people that appear to have high power, they're wanting to look out for themselves. We saw Elrond head towards Khazad-dûm, which is the realm of the dwarves, where he believed that he'd be able to meet with Prince Durin and would be welcomed with open arms as they were good friends. But due to not meeting with him in 20 years, the prince held some resentment. This was a great way of showing us the difference in lifespan of individuals in the show, and how time passes for somebody who can essentially live forever, when compared to somebody who can live for only 300 years. We saw the pair reconcile, and this was when Elnor informed the prince of the need of his assistance in order to build the tower that his king wanted him to build. We saw the incredible infrastructure and architectural skills that the dwarves had as soon as the prince entered, as it was like nothing else that we'd seen so far in the show, so you can understand why he wanted the assistance. The prince was reluctant at first, but he spoke with his father, where we then saw something else that looked a little suspicious. A chest that opened that emitted a light, but we never got to see what was behind it, so I'm intrigued to see what that is. I'm imagining it's a weapon of some kind. Outside of this arc, we saw Arondir exploring the area that was known as Hordern, which is where Bronwyn was from, and it was burnt to the ground with a hole dug in the center of it. There were no bodies present and no life left at all, so it looked as though something had dug its way up rather than down. The people of Hordern were supporters of Morgoth, and as Sauron followed on after him, they would have likely followed his path, hence why no people were there. As Arondir was going through the tunnel, we saw that he witnessed something before getting dragged by a bunch of arms behind him. It could well be orcs, as the markings on the wall were similar to what we saw on the wall inside of Bronwyn's house, where we saw her return to Theo hiding, due to an orc being present. I think the weapon that Theo stole is something that's luring the evil presence towards him. And even though they may have killed the first orc and now have proof to be able to get the townfolk to leave, it's most likely going to follow due to the fact that it could be attracted to the weapon he bestows. He clearly has a connection to the darkness, and I don't see it ending well for him. His blood seeped into the sigil that was engraved on it, and we saw that it ignited and darkness formed around him. So I think he could potentially turn, or the darkness is going to follow the people and he will lead them into danger. The last arc was Galadriel's. She was found by some people who were also part of a wreckage where we saw that she lied about being an elf to be able to get on board. This was when we heard of a worm that was present in the water that was causing the destruction. We saw Galadriel get thrown to the water, and at this point Halbrand broke free and doomed his crew to death by abandoning them. This was where we saw him pick up Galadriel and them form a connection over their personal connection to orcs ruining their lives. He was chased out of his home by orcs, which was the first thing that we really learnt about him. We also learnt that they were last seen in the Southlands, so I imagine we'll see them head towards there. Halbrand did eventually save Galadriel after she was knocked underwater, and this was then when after the storm we saw shadow of a figure appearing and looking over them both. It looks as though this could well be Elendil. This is by looking at the stature of the character and also the hairstyle compared to other characters in the show. I thought the first 2 episodes of the show were really interesting. They provided something different and set up the world in a natural way whilst giving us a slow introduction to the characters that was definitely needed. You can see how all of the different arcs are going to intertwine and lead to the bigger picture, and I think it's good that we can see that already, as the world feels large and like things could have potentially got lost. The price of the show is extreme, but the viewing experience is absolutely phenomenal. It's glossy, clean, and as crisp as you could possibly expect, and it's like watching nothing else. It's clear to see that this show will be rivaling House of the Dragon, so I'm intrigued to see which one will reign supreme. So, there you have it. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Episode 1 and 2, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Lord of the Rings, such as endings explained, theories and predictions, and character breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you want to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review next, then head over to my Twitter, @BrainPilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of the first 2 episodes? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.